the keynote speaker for the day. The next speaker actually does not need an introduction. Is Sharad Sharma. Anyway, I'll go ahead and introduce him. Sharad Sharma is the NASSCOM Executive Council and co-chair of the NASSCOM Product Conclave. He was the CEO of Yahoo India R&D and has over 23 years of experience in internet, software, and wireless sectors. He's an evangelist for developing technology product businesses in India and an active mentor for startups. And some of you may also have read that he recently founded a company focusing on analytics. Congratulations, Sharad. But you know, more than all this, actually, it's a personal honor for me to have Sharad Sharma grace the occasion here and be the keynote speaker. And he's been very generous with advising on how to go about starting an organization like IPMA and to build it for sustenance. So it's a great pleasure and a privilege for me to welcome Sharad Sharma here to speak on product managing your career. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Sharad Sharma.
So thank you for a wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to be here on the first year anniversary of IPMA. And I think there are wonderful speakers lined up today. You have Pari coming up, Vijay Anand and Jayant. So when I was thinking as to what should I talk about, they're covering important topics later in the day, I thought to myself, why don't I talk a little bit about you and your career, right? Instead of talking what's going to happen in India and also the rest of the world and what kind of business models should we focus on, a topic of interest to me, I thought, let me put that aside because there are better speakers than me to talk about that and talk a little bit about your career. Now, those of you who know me know that I don't take myself seriously. And I don't want you to take me seriously when I talk about this. So you know, I put together a few points that I'll share with you. And I'll be honest and blunt, but I want something in return. What I need two things from you in return. One, you will not take anything that I say as gospel. You have to process it, listen from one ear, process it. If it's valuable, keep 5, 10%, 15% of it, and throw the rest of it out. And I will be actually pleased if you throw all of it out. And the second thing is, you will challenge what I say. Because I think in spirit of IPMA, which I think is very nicely pulled together by Ravi, it is share, it is learn, and it is network. And I'm going to share, but I'm also here to learn. And that learning will only happen if you challenge what I'm going to say. So I'm going to keep my talk as brief as possible, because I want to preserve the interaction time, 10-15 minutes of interaction time with you. I would rather preserve that and go very quickly through my points since we are running late. So that's the plan here. Does that sound okay? Yeah. All right. So once the slides come up, we'll get started. Maybe, you know, as we get started, let's do a show of hands, just for me to get to know you a little bit. Now, how many of you, I'll frame the question and then let's do a show of hands. I want to know, you know, there are some of you who are already quote-unquote product managers and some of you who are wannabe product managers, who want to be product managers in the future. How many of you here are wannabe product managers? All right. Now tell me, amongst those of you who are product managers or wannabe product managers, how many of you are working for startups? Okay. And how many of you would define yourself working for a big company? All right, good. How many of you are, the next question is just to clarify a little bit, how many of you are, yeah. So how many of you are working on a consumer-facing product as distinct from, let's say, a SMB-facing product or as distinct from a large company, enterprise-facing product? Anybody here focusing on consumer products? Okay. How many of you focusing on small business? All right. And large enterprise or government-facing? So it seems to be a very, very interesting, even split in terms of all of these areas. How many of you have worked in the US before? Okay. How many of you would like to work in the US before? I don't see very many hands going up. I saw a few hands. I see one here and a few, very few. Oh boy. This is strange, surprising. All right, so let's get started then. I asked a bunch of questions from you and you gave me the answers. This was my first step in any case. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about your career, and I want to make 5 suggestions. The first one is very straightforward. This is especially targeted at a handful of you who said we would like to work in the US. I sincerely believe, that time has come and gone. And, stay in India, this is where the action will be. And there is a general shift that is taking place from the west to the east in terms of markets, right? In terms of opportunities within markets or growth markets. And this is where we are. Interestingly, if you see what's happening, I've been saying this a little publicly now. I think every year we will generate a $1 billion product company in terms of valuation for the next few years. Why? Because the pipeline is full. The reason I'm confident making that statement for the next 3 years is because there are 5-6 companies out there, and if all of them don't make it, I think half of them will, and therefore we will see that happen, and that's remarkable. I mean, if you see 2 of those companies, if I bring before you, both happen to be in some sense kind of similar. Why? Because if you take Zoho as an example, who do you think is Zoho's biggest competitor? Google. Take another one, InMobi. Who do you think is InMobi's biggest competitor? Google again. I mean, this is remarkable. I mean, here are 2 Indian companies going for big wins, and they're not taking some piddly competitor on. They're confidently taking Google on. Now, this has never happened in India before. Now, I do hope they succeed. But to my mind, this marks a shift in our ecosystem. Because whether or not they succeed, they have the gumption, their confidence to go after a big player like Google. Right? Now, if you see, if I pick a company in the enterprise space, large enterprise space, who I think will hit $1 billion in the next 2 or 3 years, is a company, believe it or not, out of Trivandrum. Can anybody guess which that company is? I'll give you another hint. Has anybody traveled through Heathrow in the last 2 or 3 years? Heathrow, Gatwick, airports are run by them. Emirates uses their software entirely. Cathay Pacific uses their software entirely. IPS. Right? Now it's taken them a long time. They've been around since 1997. They're valued roughly at about 600 million today. But given their path that they are on, I am reasonably confident they'll hit $1 billion. Now this is the change that is taking place in some ways. And of course, some of this, I've purposely mentioned startups or former startups, no longer small companies. InMobi is probably about 500 people now. But the same activity is also happening among bigger MNC players. So I really sincerely think this is a time to stay here. And as one of the speakers on the video, I thought very nicely mentioned, there is so to say, a small penalty for staying here. And the penalty for staying here is that the network doesn't exist. It's hard to learn, how to be excellent in product management here. And I think IPMA is hopefully going to address that as we go forward. So the second point that I want to make here is having talked a little bit about optimism, I want to also say the next few years are going to be tough. See, the last 5 years, anybody who raised their hand and said, I am a product manager, as long as you could make any soft claim that you are a product manager, you would get a job. But there's been such a big shortage of product managers, right? So job was guaranteed. Once you landed in your job, people were very forgiving and they said, figure it out. We are anyway short of product managers in such a big way. So we are willing to handhold you to whatever extent that is needed so that you can, step into that role and grow. And I think that's been good. But that has also created an environment where lots of people, I think, have become flabby and fat. in product management, and also true, by the way, in many other functions. And I think the macro environment for the next few years will be very tough. You will see that there will be a greater discrimination between good and great, between good and bad, that will come in the industry. And so this is going to be an era, I personally feel, in the next 5 years, where if you don't focus on yourself, if you don't invest in yourself, if you don't focus on the right set of skills and excellence that you need, you will find that although as a pack up till now you were traveling together, there will be enormous amount of separation of the pack that will happen in the next 5 years. The good versus great will get separated out as we move forward. Now, some of you may believe that is not going to happen. In one talk that I gave a few months ago, there was a passionate individual sitting there who challenged me on this, and he said, you are needlessly scaring us. That's what his comment was. He said in so many words, he said, you are needlessly scaring us. This is not true. This is not going to be any tougher in the future than it is now. And I actually went back and I said, maybe, he's right. Maybe I'm needlessly scaring people. And I genuinely think that is not the case. I went back and reflected on this. And I can give you many, many indicators that this is not the case. We have Pari sitting here, and Pari would tell you, Zenov data shows that the number of MNC captives that are coming into India are coming down year on year. Now, the overall growth that is taking place within those captives is definitely slowed down, and I think this is going to be probably the third year where it's very soft growth in our R&D or product captive area. I don't think, frankly, that's going to turn around in a very big way. So I think that while I'm very optimistic about what will happen here, the character of the growth will be very much focused on the results that product managers are able to produce. So if MNC captives are going to grow, this is because they are able to do something disruptive. They are able to incubate a product and take it to the marketplace. In other words, the growth will come on the back of success. It won't come on the back of just plain hiring and capability building. And of course, if you happen to work for a startup, then you of course know, the success of the startup is going to determine whether you as an individual will grow there. So I think next few years are going to be optimistic, but they will be optimistic because they will be around results that people are able to produce for products that they take to the marketplace. And therefore, the people behind those products are the ones who will end up doing well. And that is indeed how I think the marketplace, the talent marketplace, will begin to discriminate between the good and not so good product managers as we go forward, right? So the second point that I wanted to make was this, that it is going to be a tough environment. If you don't believe me, see what has happened to Nokia. And I often cite Nokia India Center, and I hope I'm not offending anybody. But the way this imploded is probably faster than a startup implodes here, right? Now the times are so tough that recently, just a few months back, Honda, a well-respected car maker, even in the US, had no problems like Toyota had during the year, introduced its 9th generation Civic. Right? There's a new Honda Civic that's been announced in the US. It's a hot selling car. It's one of the best selling cars in the US. And you know what? It never made it to the Consumer Reports in the picks for 2012. Why? Because it wasn't a bold enough change from the 8th generation to the 9th generation. Now here is a company which is well respected, is getting dinged, and their sales are already down because Consumer Reports has enormous amount of influence in the US. And why? So here is a company which has had a history of success, on the back of enormous amount of product pedigree, gets dinged because it's not bold enough in the marketplace. And so you are going to see that this is going to be a very, very tough time. And in a way, I would say this is great time because it forces even Honda to take risks, which it wouldn't want to do because of its premium positioning in that market. So you will see this play out in my mind as we go forward again and again and again. If you don't believe me, again, see what has happened to investors. Those of you who've been watching the VC investment scene, would know that we are in the third wave of investors in the last 10 years in the Indian market. The first wave of investors who came in a big way were the New York investment banker types. Right? They knew very little about entrepreneurship, hands-on, but they were great with money, right? I mean, because they had been dealing with money all along. They got wiped out very, very quickly in the first 3-4 years. And the second batch of people who came in, they threw them off, and these were people who came from Silicon Valley, right? Mohanji Jolly, there is Bejul Somia of Lightspeed Ventures, and so many others. They came and established themselves, and they basically through the investment bankers type. And if you today ask me to mention any one of those top 10 VCs of the investor banker type today would fit in the list of top 20 or top 25, I can't name a single one. They're not there. They've gone to different jobs because they didn't survive the change that's taking place. Now you have an enormous change taking place where you have entrepreneurs, Indian entrepreneurs adding early stage money to kind of entrepreneurship. And there's again a push out of the Silicon Valley investors that is taking place to much later stage in the life cycle, right? And so it's unforgiving environment. So here is a living example of how in 10 years you have seen new waves and new expectations of what constitutes a good VC or good investor come in and take the old people out. Some have adjusted very well, but mostly that is a rare phenomenon. And I would posit to you that we are going to go through this kind of a change. So there are two such changes that I want to bring to your attention. The first one is I think this broad definition of product manager that we have will get specialized. You have program managers and you have product managers. And today, by and large, in the industry, we tend to we tend to treat them as one bucket. I don't think that is going to sustain itself. Now, I am in the camp that I think, both are very important and are needed. My analogy is that you need an astronaut and you need a mission controller. If you really want a successful space mission to happen. But they are two very, very different individuals. Mission controllers are people who are detail-oriented, they're anal about small things. Astronauts, to some extent, are people who are willing to leap into the unknown. Their orientation is very different from a mission controller's orientation. You don't want a mission controller ever to leap into the unknown. You want the mission controller to always be running the mission because it's been run like that 15 times before. They've practiced, they've rehearsed, they've thought about everything that will go wrong, and then they are making sure that it won't. And they are hitting on people, making sure everything falls in place and everything goes smoothly. Those release management guys, program management guys are very different in my mind to product management guys. Now, this is the first time I'm doing this. I've never done this before. I've done this in small sessions, but I'm taking a little bit of risk of sharing it with a larger audience and making an ass of myself. But I have some simple 3 formulas. Say somebody comes to me and say, what do you think I should be? So I have 3 small tests that I give to that person. Whether should you be a program manager or should you be a product manager? So I'll share those with you. Take them with a pinch of salt. So the first one is, how do you order in a restaurant? I have found that there are 2 types of people when it comes to restaurant ordering and you go to a restaurant where you've never been before. So you don't know the menu. There are one people who get all caught up by choice A versus choice B. And in a menu, by and large, this is a choice between right and right. If you go to a decent restaurant, it doesn't really matter at one level what choice you make. You're going to get good food, it's a choice between right and right. But they are really focused on optimizing between those 2 right sets of choices, right? And they are the other set of people, they say, I don't care, you just order whatever you like, right? So I think the first set are program managers and the second set could be product managers. But the first one are for sure program managers, right? So, so the point, however, the larger point that I'm making is that, in program management, you need to sweat about small things, right? You need to be able to turn what appears as 2 equivalent choices and be able to discriminate between them. If in some cases in a product manager situation, while that is important too, there's another aspect which is important, which is to be able to frame larger issues as black and white issues, right? I mean, and to my mind, I saw some people do that with the Anna Hazare movement. I mean, very quickly they parsed this in their mind, and they came to a conclusion whether this was a go or a no-go for them, whether they would invest lots of their personal energy into that or not. And that nuanced discussion happened before they came to that decision, but after they took that decision, they were willing to change course and drive hard in that new direction. And so that's one kind of a classification. Raja would be what do you do with decisions? How do you deal with a set of decisions is the first test that I apply. The second test is how do you deal with unfamiliar zones? Do you become a bigger risk taker or a smaller risk taker? A good test of this is to take them to a party, and an unfamiliar party, and then see how they behave in that scenario. Why I say that is that I think some people shrink to their core. There's nothing right or wrong about this, and they play safe when they're in an unfamiliar environment, right? And some people, when they're in an unfamiliar environment, take liberty to experiment with stuff that they've never done before. And I am not sitting in judgment to say which is right or wrong, but all I'm saying is know yourself, because I think one fits one type of role better than the other. And knowing yourself in that respect can be very helpful. The third, of course, is how do you deal with people? And if you want to be a program manager, you have to learn to be anal with a smile. Right? I mean, there's no other way, because you are essentially playing a coordination role very often as a release manager, as a program manager. Those people don't necessarily report to you. You got to bang heads. So you can't whiplash them necessarily. You can't use position power to make it happen. So you have to be anal. And there are people who can be anal while appearing to be anal, and there are people who can be anal while not appearing to be anal. And I think a good program manager has to be really, really anal with a smile. We put together this NASSCOM product conclave, which becomes bigger every year, and we have a program management role who keeps everything together. And so there is one guy who helped us do the first orbit shift, which was 3 years ago with that conclave. His name is Rajan. He was with Motvik then, and now with Saskin, and now I know somebody smart has really hired him. So away from Saskin, and now this is a guy. If you happen to tell him that by Thursday I will make kar dunga, right? On Wednesday you will get a call, and a boss Thursday ko nahi kiya to problem. He doesn't have to say anything. On Thursday morning you'll get an SMS saying what time should I. He always smiling. But you can't escape. If you happen by mistake to make a commitment, कि मैं Thursday को कर दूंगा, you are stuck. And now remember, in that volunteer model, there's no position power, right? I mean, and yet being able to be anal in the way that I found Rajan to do with a smile all the time is something that you really, really need to do right for program management. So the point that I'm making here is that I think in your mind, you have to know yourself to make the right choice as to whether you can excel as a product manager or whether you can excel as a program manager. And this is not a right or wrong choice. I think both roles will be enormously important as we go forward, right? But make that choice, because it is clear to me where I'm sitting that if you look back 3 to 5 years from now, this separation or specialization would have happened very, very clearly. And so if it's not clear in your mind, make sure it becomes clear in your mind, because that's the only way you'll be able to excel as you go forward. The next one is, I think, don't focus on the company. Don't select the company, select the product. And I think this whole issue about should I work for an MNC or a startup is a false choice, completely false choice. If you're stuck, on the wrong product in a big company, that's it's no better in my mind than being stuck, in the wrong startup. And if you again look at the next 5 years as a year where there'll be a shakeout among product managers between good product managers and not so good product managers, this one thing, as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, I think one thing that will determine is what were you working on. And so therefore I think you have to pick something very, very carefully. And there are about 600 or so MNC captives. I think there are well over 600 product startups. You have a choice of, if you look at just Bangalore alone, you have a choice of potentially 1,000 companies to go after. But really, if you look at the number of products that are there, there are even a few more because some of the big companies have multiple choices. I think you've got to select very carefully. So how do you select carefully? I mean, what does that selecting carefully mean? So I think it first means you have to select whether for the next few years, are you going to be in a product that is consumer facing, or will you be in a product that is small business facing, or it's going to be an enterprise facing? As you know, I'm also a part-time investor with the Indian Angel Network, IF, and a bunch of other places. I have stopped looking at 3 people coming to me if they have only done a big enterprise-facing product and now come and say, I will do a consumer product. I've stopped looking at it because to my mind, it is no longer tenable for a guy to move overnight from being a big to big B player to suddenly become a big to C player. And even if it is tenable, it's not something that I want to take a risk on as an investor around that. Right? So I'm not suggesting you can't make that change, but it is a hard change. You've got to orchestrate it, you've got to plan it, and then make it happen. I think we are going to be 3 or 5 years from now in a world, what happened to electronics engineering. Anybody here who's done electronics engineering? Right? Many of you. If you ended up joining an industrial electronics company and then knocked at the door of Sony, after working there for 5 years, you would not be considered a viable candidate for being hired into a consumer electronics company, and vice versa. And this has been around for 20 years. This is not a new phenomenon. So this is where I think we are going with products. If you have been working for a big to big B product, and suddenly you think you can now make a shift to a big to B2C product, a big B to B2C product, I don't think it's going to happen, and you will have to, in your S-curve, go down a little and then start and build yourself up again, right? So I'm not suggesting you don't make a change if you are in the wrong kind of category, if you are you want to be focused on products that are addressing the small businesses in India or outside, and you're not doing that because you're stuck in a big to big B to big B company, change. I'm not suggesting you should change, but think carefully and stick with it for the next 10 years, right? Because that is the first choice in my mind that you have to make. And once you make that choice, then you can now begin to select the right set of products that you can work on, and therefore the right set of company that you'll work for as you go forward. So this is important. Now, out of the 3, I've been asked which would be your favorite, right? My favorite is the small business segment, because I really believe that has opened up in a very big way, although I think the other 2 are also very exciting. But I want to do a little bit of evangelizing for the small business one, because I really genuinely think that the next few years promise a lot of opportunity here. First, the small businesses in the Western markets are completely comfortable buying on the web. And later when Fusion Charts, I saw one of the sponsors of the last item here, is a living example of this, right? There are many others. Zoho itself that I mentioned to you is a living example of this. If you have a great product, a small business owner, will buy it on the web, and they don't care whether it comes from Estonia or Calcutta or wherever else, right? So that's opening up a huge opportunity. It's making it a flat world for Indian companies, and you're beginning to see Indian companies do well in that space, for that reason alone, because it's creating the proximity to the consumer. You don't need a field sales force to be able to go out and sell. Now, you do need a field sales force to go out and sell here in India, because the Indian small business owner in Yashwantpur or Pina is not yet comfortable buying on the web, right? So somebody has to go and sell to them. But the economics of our country are such that if we do indeed want to double our GDP in the next 9 years, which is a stated goal of the country, then the economic portfolio of our country is such that the small business segment of our GDP, which is 18% right now, will have to treble its GDP in the same period. So if the small business owner of the small business portion of our GDP does not treble, the national GDP does not double. And for that small business portion of the GDP to treble, they will have to become more competitive, and that would require penetration of IT into those markets. And because of SaaS, I think that penetration is possible, and therefore there is a very large opportunity that exists here in India. So I would say all the 3 choices or 4 choices, because I would put government in the big enterprise category, all the 3, B2C, B2 small b, B2 big B, are good choices. Make your choice and stick with it for the next 10 years, and then find the right product that you can align with, because that's selecting the product will be important. And then worry about whether it's a big company or a small company. So that is the sequence in which I would suggest that you make your career choice with respect to that. Lastly, I would say all these skills matter, and particularly in product management, I think what matters even more than that, in some sense, is your personal code of conduct, right? Because this is not, product managers in some sense are the CEOs of the product. They cannot be monitored. They have to be the engine, they have to be the drivers of what happens in the product. And therefore, there is a requirement that they have a certain way of working, a certain code of conduct that is important. And I believe there are a few things that are important, and this code of conduct is increasingly shaped by not how you work in a big company, but how you work in creation nets. Creation nets are Wikipedia, are open source, our volunteer organizations like IPMA, which are coming up and creating something here. So there are certain rules, I think, that are becoming clearer as to what requires you to be successful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, largely because I've covered it in my earlier talks in many places, and also because we are running short of time. So I'll just put it up there for you to see and open it up for Q&A here.
Specialization in terms of consumer, small business, and big business. My question is, do we need the specialization on the domains? Like you could have, say, like e-commerce kind of products, or financial products, or healthcare products. How critical is that knowledge in the next year?
Yeah, I think to some extent will be critical, because ultimately, that does make a difference if you've had a successful e-commerce product, and you could go on to do the next thing. But I want to caution that it is, in my mind, it will be the 4th thing that will be there, right? I don't want to call out any names, but you've had cases where Flipkart, which has been enormously successful, people have left and started other players, but they have not seen that success happen. And so we sometimes get carried away by thinking we know all the answers because we've been in that domain, and that acts more of a hindrance rather than help, because it kind of blinds you to your need to keep learning in that area, because you start believing you know everything that needs to be known in that area. And you are seeing that happen. You have a team that's kind of left Myntra and starting something again, and I hope they're successful, but sometimes you worry that you run this risk, that you have this kind of a hubris that comes in, that you know everything that you need to know. And that creates its own problem. We saw that happen with Mindtree when it left Wipro. They applied the Wipro formula to Mindtree, which was, in my mind, not the right thing to do, because what was right for Wipro 10 years back was not right for Mindtree, when they got started. And you may see, so this problem repeats itself. So I would say it is good to stick with that domain, as long as you remain, what I would say is, maintain enough humility to know that you still need to keep learning in that domain as you go forward. Sometimes when you change domains, that humility is forced upon you and you're forced to learn. And that learning mindset, I think, is very, very key for a product manager, as I mentioned earlier in point number 3 as well. Does that answer your question? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Key characteristics of products for the SME segment, maybe in terms of pricing or delivery, what is shaping up, or some key characteristics, what you see.
See, I distinction between two SME markets today. I think they are two very different, and it will take several years for them to converge. One is the Indian market or India-like markets, and Africa would fit in that category. And then, to my mind, are the Western SME markets. And they're completely at a different stage. And if somebody is successful in the Western markets, their success in India is not guaranteed, and vice versa, because they're very, very different animals at this point in time. I suspect your question is more to do with in this, and I think Pari is going to talk a little bit about India here. So he's the right person to give a detailed answer on this. My own belief is not yet proven. It's a hypothesis, and it's not. I'm looking to figure out whether this hypothesis is correct or not. My own hypothesis is that in the Indian SMB sector, solutions that are more exoskeleton based rather than endoskeleton based are likely to be successful. Because the nature of our SMB pyramid, while we have large number of SMEs, and if we compare them, China has a large number of SMEs, the two pyramids are very different in its characteristics. The number of SMBs in India which are less than 10 people, less than 20 people, are much larger population in the India pyramid than they are in the China pyramid. So when you have only 20 people, you don't need sophisticated technology to tell you what your inventory is and what that is. So I have a belief that therefore endoskeleton systems which help run the business better from the inside are less important in the India context, but a way to string together those small SMBs together, because together they can be much more effective and allows them to therefore get business, collaborate with each other, get more done, shave off cycle time from what they are offering in the value chain. Those kind of solutions possibly will end up being more powerful. But I would let this be answered much better by Pari when he comes up later. So maybe one or two questions if there is time, if that's okay. Yes,
yeah.
Please.
Good morning,
sir. Where are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
My question is around startups, e-commerce, and VCs. Right. So we have seen enough startups recently in the e-commerce space that have come up, and I have seen VCs funding it left, right, and center. I have literally lost count of number of e-commerce startups, especially in the retail space. And as you mentioned, folks from Myntra went ahead and formed another startup in a market which already we have 2-3 existing e-commerce companies. Is there enough market already for so many e-commerce startups in India, or are they just being there when the market comes out?
Right. Somebody mentioned earlier in the video that, or somebody I was sitting next to, I don't remember, I overheard a comment today in the morning that an overnight success takes 20 years or something like that, right? So my general rule is that if something appears in Times of India, it is too late to invest in, and it's too late for a product manager to make their career better. So e-commerce has come in Times of India many times. So my view is too late, right? Because that's my simple rule, right? Really what I mean is that there is this Gartner hype cycle which talks about this, and something which gets hyped to a point where it's coming in the mass media. Then as insiders have already missed the boat here. Focus on the next thing, please. Right? And so that would be my answer. That there is now a herd tendency to go into e-commerce, and I'm not saying they will not be successful, some of them will be successful. But really the big opportunities will lie in areas which haven't yet become, reached that point in the hype cycle, right? Now, a word for VCs, and I can afford to criticize them because I'm a co-founder of India Innovation Fund, and I've been associated with funds as well. VCs are they have tremendous herd mentality, right? So I personally have learned mostly from Israel as an example, that if we really want early stage capital to happen in India, right, that will not be US institutional capital. It has to be Indian capital for Indian entrepreneurs. Because, if you have US institutional capital, and I'll give an example for example, Helion, which is very anchored general partners in India. Ashish is a close friend, and Sanjeev and Kanwal all are very much anchored in the Indian ecosystem. The Indian, VC investors, but their institutional capital is all Western capital. So every quarter they have to give a report and say, how did we do this quarter? And like it or not, that shapes their investment philosophy here in India. And therefore, it is difficult for them to be very early stage investors in India, despite their own biases, individual biases being there to do that. So I think we've got to find a way to unlock Indian capital for early stage investment. Late stage or mid stage, it doesn't matter. And by the way, this is exactly what's happened in Israel. Israel has enormous amount of US risk capital that flows in, but all that US risk capital has become Series A or later. And all their early angel capital ends up being the local entrepreneurs providing it. And because this is how the model works. So I would say, don't make decisions based on what VCs are doing. First is, if something has appeared in Times of India, it's too late for you. And something, if you see VCs doing it, it's all by and large too late for you again. Because VCs are herd guys, they get into the game usually too late in the game. And but it's okay for them. Their model will not work for you as a product manager, because you want to get into a product where it's truly in its conception stage, if that is what you want. And that's going to be probably a little late for you to be able to do that. So that is my long-winded answer to, does that answer your question? Right, okay. So we'll take maybe 2 more questions and we're done. And one here, and then I had he's been patiently raising his hand.
Big time competitors are not your monster, and restructuring the process flow of the website. Can you please tell me what are the exact domain or the skill set required so that I can be assured that I am delivering the thing excellent? Because I have experience of product management.
Yeah, with your question. Because that's very specific to you, right? Both because of the domain and because of where you are in your own journey. So I would say this is probably better answered in a smaller setting than in a big.
Would it be helpful to go for any product management course or something like that?
Sure, and there are many. So first of all, lot of things you can learn now on the web. I think at an early stage company where you are, I think the lean startup philosophy is very useful. So I would imagine that Eric Rice, Steve Blank, and all of those, steveblank.com, Eric Rice has a book published called Lean Startup, and there are lots of blogs that talk about that. There is enormous amount that you can learn. The big concepts you can learn through that alone. Then there are lots of players here who are offering product management training as well, right? And there are multiple companies doing that, and they sometimes have public courses rather than company-specific courses. So that would be also a place to learn functional skills about product management that would be applicable here. I would say complement that with finding mentors outside your company. Because yours is a small company, and you would find 9 out of 10 times if you look and ask somebody and say, would you be my mentor? They'll probably sign up to help you in some way. And so those are the 3 things that you can do to become better product manager and do a better job than before. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So last question. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Sharma, for your...
Hey, nobody calls me Mr. Sharma. Sorry.
Just, when you were explaining one of the points, you mentioned that, as an investor, you would not go with 3 types of people, but somehow you ended with only 1 type of person.
Okay.
So can you just let us know the other 2 types of people where you don't invest?
There's a company called Sedimac. I don't know whether many of you wouldn't have heard this. This is a Professor Shashikaran in IIT Bombay, right? He told a story. He said, you know what, we've been on this journey of mechanical engineering, take Honda as an example again, which produces really precision engines, right? So if you look at a batch of engines, precision engines means within the batch the variability is less, or 2 engines will look more alike, and therefore you can optimize that engine for whatever you want, performance or fuel efficiency, and therefore that's the journey that everything is on. But as you go down this precision path, as you become more and more precision engines, the cost of doing it becomes higher, and you need skill sets which are very hard to find here in India. So India is kind of losing out in this battle because the SMB sector is not able to keep up with this precision part. So he said, I got a different paradigm in mind. I'm going to focus on coarse engines. And Coarse engine means that within a batch of engines, no two engines are alike, they're all different. So each one has its own fingerprint. I will put algorithms on top of it so that in the first 100 hours of operation, it learns what the characteristics of the engine are and will therefore adjust for it, and I can still get the performance of a precision engine. Intellectually enormously interesting idea, right? But the first thing was, gosh, this sounds great, but does it really work? He said, no, come to my lab. I've been working on it for 5 years. And indeed, he showed in the lab that it works, right? And so the India Innovation Fund made an investment in it. And to their success, they've signed up one of the top engine small mobile manufacturers who's going to pay them $1 for millions of engines because they can save more than $2 by following this path. So it's kind of reached kind of commercialization. Now the reason I mention this is because in this example, this would not have happened had public goods not been created. In other words, what I mean by that, had he not had the lab in which to prove his concept and bring it to a prototype form. And what I would suggest to you is that we can continue to focus on thin layer ideas of another monster or another idea, which is all good things to do. But if you really want breakthroughs, we got to find ways to connect back with public goods that are happening, where some kind of research and university research can be commercialized, where there is deep thinking that is happening to address a problem in a way that had not been addressed before. And to my mind, people who are focused on that are the best product managers who can take the thing forward. So with that, I've taken a lot of time, but I thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharad. A small souvenir for Sharad Sharma.
All right, thank you so much.
I don't want to shorten the speaker's timing. Are you, just raise your hand if you're okay with it, we delay the lunch by half an hour. Okay, just raise your hand. Hey, that's good spread. Yeah, thank you so much.